Welcome to the 76 Capital Leadership Series. My name is Wayne Kimmel, and I'm your host, as well as the managing partner of 76 Capital. On this show, I interview top entrepreneurs, athletes, and executives who are truly shaping the sports industry and many times changing it and transforming it, and just super exciting to do all the things that we do. Before we get started, of course, I want to give a quick shout out to Ty and Vince back at the station who are making it all happen, pushing all the right buttons. Great job, guys. And you can follow me on Twitter as well as all across social media at Wayne Kimmel. And please subscribe to our 76 Capital Leadership Series on YouTube as well as on all your favorite podcast networks. So if you're an entrepreneur and you're building a company in the sports industry and you truly are trying to do the next thing, whether that's in sports betting, in esports, in the media, or the sports tech world, please reach out to us at 76 Capital. We would love to talk with you. Now let's get to it. We have a great guest today. We have someone I've known for many years. Really excited to have him come on our show. His name is Rob Simmelkjaer. Rob is the chairman of the board of the Connecticut State Lottery. He is also a former executive at NBC and was at ESPN as well, and is the CEO of Persona Media. Rob, welcome to our 76 Capital Leadership Series.
Wayne, thank you so much. This is really fun. Love watching your interviews. It's a great platform, so I'm really honored to be a guest. Thank you.
Well, we're so excited to have you because what you're doing in the state of Connecticut as the chairman of the Connecticut State Lottery, there are some incredible things that are happening within the state, and we'd love for you to share some of the things that are happening as we speak right now.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a really busy year. So I first, the Governor Lamont asked me to chair the board of the Connecticut Lottery back in May of 2020. And when we first had that conversation, we were thinking ahead about the possibility of doing some things like, trying to get sports betting legalized first and foremost, and some other, sort of innovative things that could be done. The lottery's been around since 1971, so it's old school lottery for the most part that generates hundreds of millions of dollars a year for the state. But we had a vision that, as more and more states are legalizing sports betting, that we could bring Connecticut in line with that. There were some big challenges to getting that done. First and foremost, conversations between the state and the two Indian tribes that run casinos in Connecticut, the Mohegan tribe and the Mashantucket Pequot tribe, which runs Foxwoods, had been at an impasse for several years, really, since PASPA was overturned by the Supreme Court. And so there were really a lot of questions about whether some of the differences could be bridged. The tribes had taken the position that they had the exclusive right to run sports betting in the state, that no one else could really be involved. Otherwise, it would be a violation of the compact, their agreement with the state. The state had taken the position that they wanted to make more of an open market of it. So, with the governor's support, I, along with some others in his administration, sat down, late last year and then earlier this year to really start talking to the tribal leaders about a way forward. And, fortunately, we were able to reach an agreement, and that happened earlier this year. That led to, statute being created and ultimately passed and signed by Governor Lamont. And as we sit here now speaking in September, Wayne, we're, just weeks away from sports betting launching in the state. So it's very exciting.
Well, I want to get into all of the details. I want to hear kind of how this all came about, maybe get into even more, the overall process of how that it all came to be. I mean, as you described, it's not just so simple as, just going to have sports betting in the state of Connecticut. You actually have, there's a lot of things that you had to deal with, including the different tribes and the compacts and all the things that went into it. Rob, on this note, kind of what's next? When you kind of look into your crystal ball as the chairman of the board of the Connecticut Lottery, what do you think this is in the next 2 to 3 years, what this industry is going to look like in your state?
Well, there's no question that gaming is going to be a huge part of the sports industry. We're still in the bottom of the first inning as far as I'm concerned and seeing this play out. I think you're going to see more and more investment into this, both from the digital product side, from the retail side. And we're going to start in Connecticut with like some fairly bare bones retail, but where I think we're going is 15 amazing places where you can go and have a great time, not just watching sports and betting on sports, but making sports betting the anchor tenant around multifaceted entertainment opportunities, places where you can go for live music, for dancing, for all kinds of live entertainment, shopping, as well as a chance to place a bet on your favorite team. So I see sports betting from a development point of view in Connecticut as like an anchor tenant around more and more stuff that will build up around that. And then as far as the sports industry goes, listen, we're seeing it. We're seeing more and more investment. We're seeing this is where the growth is, and more players are getting into this in different ways. I mean, who'd have thought 5 years ago that you'd see sports books opening inside of arenas and stadiums, like the one that William Hill Caesars has in DC, or what's going to be happening in Arizona or other spaces? I mean, this would have been like fantasy land 5 years ago to have betting in the stadium. And so you're going to continue to see that proliferate. And you're going to continue to see, this grow both digitally and in person. One thing I would say, Wayne, is as this does grow, you're also, I think, going to see more and more attention paid to the regulatory side of this to make sure that the pendulum doesn't swing too far to the other side. If you look at what's happened in Europe, in the UK, you did get to a point where the marketing of gambling was so intense. I mean, it's on half of the Premier League teams have sports books on the front of their jersey, right? And you've got like a tremendous amount of marketing and opportunities to bet. And at some point, the regulators in the UK, the regulators decided, we need to sort of bring this back a little bit. It had gone too far. So I think you'll see probably an ebb and flow in terms of the way this is regulated and the way people sort of see this from a safety and responsibility point of view. But at the end of the day, this industry is going to continue to grow over the long term, because there's still so much of the U.S. population that isn't even eligible yet. I mean, California, Texas, still New York, still Florida are not yet really up and running, and these are some huge states. So there's just a tremendous amount of runway in front of us.
You had all of this experience. You talk about, fantasy land of the fact that you would have a sports book inside of a venue, whether it's in a stadium or an arena. I would also probably argue it's sort of fantasy land that your former employers, whether that's the ESPNs, ABCs, NBCs, are partners now with sports books.
Yes.
How shocking for you as someone who's been in the media industry all of these years to now have, like, wow, they're actually putting lines on TV, that they're partners with the different books. That must be incredible.
It is, but, it was clear that it was going to happen from the day of PASPA. In fact, before PASPA. I mean, probably about a year before PASPA, before that decision came down, I started working at NBC on a strategy as to how that company would play in that space. And we looked at everything from creating our own sports book to more of a Sky Bet model, where we would, or what Fox Bet ended up being, where we would sort of lend our brand to a sports book, to just creating assets that sports books would end up buying as advertisers. And those things were all contemplated, and we've seen media companies pretty much run that full gamut, right? From just taking ad dollars, to what Fox Bet did, to what a company like ESPN's already done with partnerships with DraftKings and Caesars. So you're seeing the full gamut. I think you're going to see more media companies go from having a foot in that water to diving in head first and being in the operating side of things. You saw what Sports Illustrated did, a legacy media brand, and their deal with 888. So I think every sports media brand is looking at this as a growth opportunity. And the playbook was already there to a degree from the explosion of daily fantasy sports that we saw when FanDuel and DraftKings first came on the scene. You saw how many dollars were there for the advertising departments of these media companies to tap into. And so that playbook was already there, and they're really just running that playbook, I think, but in a much more comprehensive way, because the dollars are much, much bigger.
Absolutely. And I just remember all of our conversations when you were back at NBC with our good friend, Brian Musburger at VSiN. And, now VSiN was subsequently acquired by DraftKings, and now that partnership and all the things that DraftKings is now doing. It's just amazing, to see where things are going.
It is. Congrats to you and Brian on that, by the way. That was a great outcome, I'm sure. And I know it's exciting to have VSiN as part of the DraftKings world.
I'd love to hear a little bit about Rob. I mean, first, everyone who's out there listening or watching the show, you can follow Rob at Rob Simmelkjaer on Twitter. And just Rob,
if you can spell it, yeah. Make sure you take a screenshot.
Well, when anyone can, find our 76 Capital Leadership Series, they can easily find Rob. But it's really important. This is someone that I recommend you keeping an eye on. And certainly, Rob, if you share some of your background, you've done some incredible things in the sports industry, in the media industry, and now as the chairman of the Connecticut Lottery. Where did you grow up, and how did it all start for you?
Thanks for asking. So I'm really a New Yorker by birth. I was born in New York City. I grew up in sort of a mix between northern New Jersey and New York City. Graduated high school in the city, went on to college at Dartmouth, went to law school, Harvard Law School. And then, before I ever went to law school, I had an early interest in sports and sports media. I played baseball growing up. Was very involved in sort of sports media and broadcasting when I was in college. I had internships at ABC Sports and CBS Sports. So there was sort of like my driving passion was sports and media from a young age. And, when I was practicing law, I still wanted to get back into that world. And a guy who I'd worked for when I was at CBS Sports, who a lot of people in the industry know, a guy named Len DeLuca, he was then a senior executive at ESPN. And he hired me at ESPN back in 2002 which is dating me a little bit, to be the sort of director of programming for the NBA. They had just acquired the rights to the NBA. And so my first real job in sports was a great job. I was basically in charge of the NBA on ESPN for a couple of years as it launched. And that was really an incredible experience. I got to work really closely, not just with a number of great people at ESPN, but also people at the NBA, like, the late, great David Stern, Adam Silver, who's still a friend, and many others there. So it was an amazing introduction to the industry. From there, I ended up doing a number of things at ESPN, international business development. I was George Bodenheimer's sort of chief of staff for several years, who, of course, was the great leader of that organization for a couple of decades. Learned at the foot of the master, as I like to say, working with George for a couple of years. And then I also did a little work at ABC News. Wayne, one thing that people may know about me, and it surprises them sometimes, is I occasionally pop up on the air, not just being interviewed on shows like this, but I did a fair amount of on-air work both at ESPN and ABC News during my time there. And then when I went over to NBC Sports in 2011, that was kind of part of the deal. I ran a part of NBC Sports called NBC Sports Ventures, which was a new business development and sort of, startup investment arm of NBC Sports. But I also did some on-air stuff. I covered 3 Olympics for NBC. I did a number of things. So that has made my path pretty unusual and great. And so I left NBC Sports in 2019 to start Persona.
Well, before we get into Persona, I got to ask you, Rob, and I, you've had this opportunity at ESPN, ABC, NBC, and doing all these on-air, an opportunity to really cover some incredible events. What are some of your top memories that you've had, from in covering these, all the things that you did from a sports perspective?
For me, I would say from the on-air point of view, there's definitely nothing like being involved with an Olympics. The excitement that comes with that, the teamwork that goes into producing an Olympics and putting an Olympics on is unparalleled. The people, my former colleagues at NBC Sports, it's like I compare it to like a military operation, how much goes into producing an Olympics at the level they do. And so just being a part of that, a small part of that, I hosted the MSNBC coverage, anchored it for a couple of Olympics in 2012 and 2016, and also did Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang 2018. So just being a small part of that, I think, was incredible. It was awe-inspiring. both from the athletic side of it, as well as the production side and the business side of it. The other things that stand out for me, Wayne, are somewhat more difficult to talk about. I mean, when I was at ABC News, I covered some pretty intense events. Actually, the news business is very different. I loved it, but it's very intense. I covered some really horrible things that happened, the school shooting at Virginia Tech, and another one in Pennsylvania, not far from you, Lancaster County, in person, and doing interviews of people who lost loved ones and children. So, I did some things that have left a real mark on me in terms of, some of the tragedy that I've seen through that. But, that's one of the things that's great about sports, is that it gives everyone a chance to come together to, experience something that's dramatic, but also uplifting and fun. And so I've really enjoyed doing that.
Well, it's really exciting to have Rob Simmelkjaer, the chairman of the board of the Connecticut Lottery, on our 76 Capital Leadership Series. And Rob, I think one of the things I want to do, I'd love to tie together what you just described as, how hard it is to put on a great production of whether it's the Olympics or just any sort of live sports event, to what is happening at the in Connecticut with sports betting in general. I mean, there's, like you said, there's so many pieces that need to come together, and so maybe we talk a little bit about the past of what it was like to put together from a business perspective, from the actual, all the trucks and all the lines and all the stuff that you need to do to run a major production. But in a way, it seems to me like that's kind of set you up to be able to handle all of the things that are now happening that you got to deal with as the chairman of the Connecticut Lottery.
Well, I've definitely, and I think this experience has been really unparalleled for me in terms of taking a complex situation, working with a team, and coming up with a solution. And, every state is a little bit different, right? I mean, New Jersey, which was, of course, the first state after PASPA was overturned to legalize, they already had a framework in place for how they were going to do sports betting. They had a well-established, vibrant gaming economy, lots of operators, both from the sort of horse racing side as well as lots of casinos with Atlantic City and all of that. So they were already sort of well-positioned, had a plan, were ready to turn it on, and of course they did so very quickly after PASPA was overturned. Every state's a bit different, and Connecticut, Connecticut's been in gaming since the lottery was created in 1971, but it was in the early 90s when the two tribes, got the federal recognition and went into the agreement, the compact with the state to open those casinos, Foxwoods and Mohegan Sun, which, by the way, are two of the most profitable casinos in the world. And so it was complicated after PASPA because they felt that those agreements with the state automatically gave them the exclusive right to operate sports betting as a so-called casino game. There's a classification in the federal law that refers to class 3 casino games, and they felt that the sports betting was just theirs and nobody else should have it. There were others who wanted to be more like New Jersey and have lots of different operators coming in, and therefore there's certainly a feeling that the more operators you have, the more the market will be developed and the more money the state can make. So we had to sort of find a compromise there. And frankly, Wayne, the pandemic probably had as much to do with getting it done as anything, because the pandemic really created some acute needs on both the sides of the tribes and the state. The tribes had to shut down their casinos, during 2020, during the second quarter of 2020 in particular, and that cost them millions of dollars in revenue. It cost them jobs. It's a part of the state, southeastern Connecticut, that relies pretty heavily on those casino jobs. So it was a big blow, and they needed something. They needed to get this done, and the state needed some revenue too. So it created a pathway, as far as I was concerned, to give something that would get them to the table and also something that would be good for the state. And so the way the deal ended up working, Wayne, is the state essentially gave out only 3 licenses to operate in the state of Connecticut. The tribes got 2, lottery has the 3rd for sports betting. The tribes, in addition to licenses to operate online sports betting around the state, also got the only 2 licenses to operate online casino games So they're going to be able to operate online, blackjack and poker and online games of that nature. Lottery got the right also to operate online sales of lottery tickets. So we'll be selling Powerball and Mega Millions and Keno and things like that online as well. So it was a compromise that was reached. There were some other elements that we had to agree to. Lottery got the right to create 15 retail locations around the state of Connecticut. So we'll be launching those in the coming months, or weeks actually. But we had to stay outside of a 25-mile radius of the tribal casinos. So they sort of got that area to themselves. So there were all kinds of compromises that went into it. I worked very closely with a guy named David Lehman, who was the head of economic development for the state of Connecticut, a tremendous guy, former Goldman Sachs banker. And he and I worked very closely together on getting that deal done with the tribe. So it was really, to me, it was like an exercise in negotiating and sort of what are your must-haves versus what are the things you want to have. And it was just really a great experience being able to reach that agreement.
Well, it certainly sounds like it was an amazing, having to bring so many different groups together. Again, as you said, compromise, try to figure it all out. In the end, I think it was it Foxwoods and Mohegan? They're the two the casinos that got the licenses, and my understanding is that DraftKings is with Foxwoods and FanDuel is with Mohegan, and
Correct.
then. That's right. Okay. And then how? So then you picked an operator as well?
Yeah. So one of the things that's interesting about lotteries being in this space, and you've seen it in other states, and lotteries have had, I would call it, mixed success in terms of their sports betting track record so far, is it's a little bit different when you're a state entity, and the lottery is what's called, actually, in Connecticut, our lottery is a quasi-public entity or corporation. So it is a public entity in that its profits all go to the state, but we also have our own board, obviously, that I chair, and we have the ability to act a little bit more like a private company. But we still had to go through sort of a traditional RFP process. And, the tribal casinos were able to operate more like businesses would, and they just sort of did their deals. And in fact, DraftKings' deal with Foxwoods was done a couple of years ago, before we were even close to having sports betting legalized. So they were able to get a pretty good head start in terms of creating that partnership and forming that. FanDuel and Mohegan had a partnership as well that related to fantasy games. So, there was already a track record. We started an RFP process in April of 2021, once there was a clear line of sight to getting this law passed. And we had to sort of open it up to all comers, get proposals in, evaluate the proposals. We didn't take a pure lowest bidder approach in the way we did it. We were able to take some other things into consideration, Wayne. One of the key factors for us was the legislation, which was affected by the deal with the tribe, said that the lottery could not choose an operator that used a casino brand as its leading brand. So we could not choose in our RFP process, BetMGM, for instance, because that's a casino brand. We could not choose Caesars, even though they were William Hill at the time. They had been acquired by Caesars, so we knew they'd be going to the Caesars brand, or Bally's, or any of the other sort of casino front-facing brands. We had to choose an entity that had a non-casino brand that we could work with. So going through that process, we ended up doing a deal with a company that, folks in the industry know that they're not as well known as DraftKings and FanDuel, Rush Street Interactive, which is based in Chicago. I've gotten to know their team really well. They're terrific. Richard Schwartz, their CEO, is a tremendous guy. Rob Picard, others on that team. They operate a couple of brands right now. One is Bet Rivers, which is a casino brand around the Rivers casinos. Another is Play SugarHouse, which is the brand that we will launch with. You would know, Wayne, from being a Philadelphia guy, that SugarHouse was a casino in Philly, but it's been since rebranded Rivers. And so that SugarHouse brand now qualifies as a non-casino brand. And so we're going to be launching with that brand. But I will say, and I can't say too much about this right now, we expect in a year from now, we'll probably be operating under another brand that I think will be a tremendous brand, but can't say anything about it yet because it's still confidential.
Well, you'll have to come back on the show and break that with us.
I tell you what, I'd love to, because the story, if it all comes to fruition, there's a great story around what's happening and some of the brand stuff that's happening with RSI potentially. But can't say much about it now, but would love to come back and talk about it more.
Well, it's certainly exciting to hear, how you are launching in the next couple weeks across the state. I mean, I think it's exciting. You and New Jersey are sort of like boxing in, New York until it happens. But I mean, the fact is that, your proximity to New York and, it's probably going to be, from my perspective, a really, successful and profitable venture for the state of Connecticut.
Yeah, we anticipate it's going to generate hundreds of millions of dollars for the state. Our minimum guarantee from Rush Street, RSI, is in the hundreds of millions, but we expect to do much more than that. So we think it will do really well. We think it's really important for the state to be in this space. I mean, we didn't want to be surrounded by other states, that were doing legal sports betting. Obviously, New Jersey is already doing it. New York is in the process of legalizing mobile. Rhode Island is already legal. Massachusetts is apparently on the way to doing it. So we felt it made sense. We're very cognizant, of course, Wayne, of some of the responsibilities that come with operating gaming in a state. We've got to be mindful of responsible gaming, of gambling addiction, and the impact that has. We already have gaming in the state, so we already have an established set of constituents, from the Department of Mental Health to the Council on Problem Gaming, Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling. So they're already set up. Their funding is going to increase dramatically by virtue of this new expanded gaming legislation. So they'll have more resources available to help people who need help. And, I think bringing more of this online and out of sort of the shadows of illegal bookmakers or offshore, bookies, and also, frankly, bringing more of the lottery business, which is currently a $1.5 billion a year cash business in Connecticut, and bringing more of that online will give us more tools to identify problem gamblers, to give people a chance to self-exclude themselves from playing if they feel they need to identify patterns of problem gambling and give people resources where they need it.
Well, certainly, we're in lockstep there around the bet responsibly side of things. I mean, we at 76 Capital became the first investment partner with the American Gaming Association on their Have a Game Plan, initiative to really make sure that everyone is out there and betting responsibly. And I'm happy to hear it's something that's very important to you as well.
Absolutely. It's been ingrained in what lottery has done for nearly 50 years, but I do think some of these innovations really create opportunities to do better in that regard. RSI also has a really well-established track record of responsible gaming. Our regulations in the state of Connecticut, which were just approved recently, also have a real focus on that, but it's something that we have to think about every day.
Absolutely. I mean, so you mentioned earlier, Rob, about how there's going to be different ways that as someone that is in the state of Connecticut, how they're going to be able to bet on sports. There'll be physical locations, there'll be the apps. I noticed that one of the physical locations was going to be in the XL Center. I believe that's where the Connecticut Huskies play. How is that all going to work out?
So we're going to launch with 10 retail locations around the state. We have the right under the statute to have as many as 15. And so at or around launch, it'll be 10 or 11, actually, because we'll add Bridgeport as well. We'll have 11 at start. The ones in the closest to New York City, for those in that area, will be in Stamford, Connecticut. The Bobby V's, which a lot of people know in Stamford, it's a popular spot in downtown Stamford, will be one of our marquee locations in Fairfield County. We'll have a location in Bridgeport, which hasn't been announced yet. As launch rolls out, we're going to have more locations. We're going to have one in Norwalk, Connecticut, which is really just going to be an OTB location that will have this additional betting ability. The Sports Haven, which is a big location in New Haven, right off of 95 and 91, will be another location. We'll have the Bobby V's at Bradley Airport, really right across the street from the terminal in Windsor, Connecticut, will be another one. And then there'll be one at the OTB, the Winners location in Hartford, in South Hartford. So the XL Center, which you mentioned, is the sort of downtown arena in Hartford where the UConn Huskies do play some games. They play most of their games on campus in stores, but both the men and women do play some games. There's also minor league hockey and some other events there. That's a location where the Hartford Whalers used to play back in the day. So there's a lot of history there. And we're in discussions with the government authority that runs that location to create a pretty high-end sort of, sportsbook experience there as part of a larger redevelopment of that location. That will not be up and running at launch. That's probably more of a 2022 initiative. My hope is to have that up and running by the launch of NFL season in 2022, but there's still some work to be done on that. But before that, there'll be, whether it's up at Bradley International or the Winners facility near the Brainerd Airport in Hartford, will both be available as places that people can go and place bets in retail. So yes, those retail locations, Wayne, are really important because a lot of people, they want to go bet and have an experience, hang out, have a beer and some food with friends and watch the games. A lot of people would prefer to bet in cash, right? Which I think is, in a lot of ways, is a healthy decision, not to put, betting on your card or whatever it is, getting involved with, connecting it right to your bank account. So a lot of people prefer to bet with cash for different reasons. And these locations, not only will they be places you can go place a bet, but they'll also be places you can fund your online account. So, you want to use cash to fund your online app account, you can go in and give, a teller there $100, and now that's available for you to bet using the online platform. So they'll be really important. And I think are going to be an important distinction from what the tribal casinos will offer, which will be retail locations at their casinos at Foxwoods and also at Mohegan Sun, as well as the apps that FanDuel and DraftKings will bring to the market.
It's really interesting. I mean, let's use Bobby V's as an example, right? You just mentioned a teller. So you're going to have that full experience. It'll be more than kiosks in these locations?
Yes. We'll have both kiosks and humans in all those locations where you can, place your bet with a human teller. There'll be at least one at every location during operating hours. And, we think that's important. It's a new market, developing market for a lot of folks who are new to sports betting. They may have questions about, what does this mean when it says -110, or, how do you create a parlay, or things like that. So we want to give people the ability to ask questions and learn a little bit. But, the kiosks that are coming in are really terrific. We've got 54 that will be arriving in the state any day now. We'll be distributing those around our locations, the Bobby V's, the New Haven location, but we'll be at hundreds of those kiosks by the time that we, are really fully up and running.
You mentioned, we talked about betting responsibly and how important that is. What about from an integrity perspective? I mean, you have, as the chair of the board of the Connecticut Lottery, I mean, you got to worry about the overall integrity of the games themselves and how that all plays out. Are there any specific things that you are going to be looking for, or are there any situations that are in this certain legislation that you have to do from an integrity perspective?
Yeah, it's interesting. Connecticut is in a little bit of a somewhat different situation in some ways, just in the fact that we don't have any professional sports teams in the state at this point. So pretty much all the betting that takes place is going to be on stuff happening outside of the state. There was a bit of a debate during the legislative process about how things would work with UConn. UConn obviously is a, big time, particularly college basketball, men's and more so women's college basketball powerhouse. And the decision was taken not to allow any betting on individual UConn games, whether those games are home or away. You will not be able to place a bet on an individual UConn game. You will be able to place proposition bets on UConn. So you can place a bet at the beginning of the NCAA tournament, whether they're going to win the whole tournament or not. That was considered a safer play than individual, point spread type betting on games. So that was one integrity thing that was taken into account in the legislation. As far as the larger integrity piece, this is really a national issue now, and the leagues are, of course, working very closely with the overall industry. I know the industry has banded together to, create integrity monitoring solutions to identify unusual gaming behavior, unusual betting activity, whether it's on big events like NFL games or smaller events like, challenger tennis events that are happening, somewhere in the world. And, maybe there's unusual betting activity on a particular player and then something happens. So I know that that's an industry-wide issue. And, we know that our partners at RSI, Rush Street Interactive, are synced in with all of that, are a part of all of the sort of industry-wide cooperation that is necessary to pick up on that. And we're primarily we're relying on them to make sure that we're covered there.
It makes a lot of sense. I mean, one of the things I did want to touch on were certain things that you can and you can't do. Like are there some new types of potential prop bets or in-game or in-play type betting that you could potentially do in Connecticut as compared to other states, and some things that you can't do? And hearing about the Connecticut piece is interesting. Are there some other things you can touch on?
I think we'll look pretty similar to a lot of other states in the markets that we offer. We'll definitely have pregame and in-game betting across all the major well-known sports, as well as some less well-known sports like table tennis, which became a really hot market during the pandemic. So we'll have, pretty much everything that you could think of as a normal market to bet on will be offered in Connecticut. One area that is talked about a lot, and Wayne, I know that it's an area of interest for you in your investing activity, is esports. And we've looked at esports. We've talked about esports a little bit. Esports is not going to be available at launch in Connecticut from a betting point of view. I think that's probably a good thing, at least for now. I'm really anxious to see how esports develops, how the betting markets around that develop. But it has been my opinion to this date. I'm curious if you have another opinion on it, that it's just not quite ready for that yet. That maybe at the sort of on the biggest stages, League of Legends World Championships, where there's like a lot of money on the line and these athletes are well compensated and all of that. Maybe it's a little bit safer there, but it's a lot of the more minor competitions, which most of esports still is. I'm still a little not quite ready to embrace it there, but I'm curious what you're seeing in that space.
Well, Rob, you're such a pro. I mean, you anticipated my next question around esports, and I completely, agree with you.
You can tell I'm used to being the interviewer as much as I am being the interviewee. So I'll turn the tables on you once or twice.
Not a problem. I love it. I mean, again, it's really great having you on our show. I mean, you, as the chairman of the board of the Connecticut Lottery, a former NBC, ABC, ESPN exec, and on-air personality, and now CEO of Persona as well. And I'd love to get into that a little bit now, and hear kind of what you're building with Persona and what some of the things that you're doing there, and how all of your experience is helping you build this next generation company.
Well, thank you. So I'll talk a bit about Persona. The idea for Persona really came from my experience doing what you and I are doing right now, but sitting in your chair of being the interviewer. And, what I love most about being on the air was always having these conversations, getting people to talk about themselves, about, what they knew well, sometimes challenging them, asking hard questions. I've always thought that the interview format is, to me, like the most fundamental form of both journalism and also just learning and exchange of ideas. It's how humans really, since like the time of Aristotle, right, have exchanged information, Plato and like the dialogues, right, asking questions, getting answers. It's just a fundamental human behavior. And I really wanted to try to create a platform that was centered around question and answer conversations. Where the sort of spiritual root of it is for me, and where I think the focus will be going forward for that business Persona, is in two areas. Number one, the family side of things. So the idea for it really came to me when a cousin of mine found an old photograph of my grandfather, who's been deceased since the year 2000. And it was a photograph of him as a young man. And I never had seen him like as a 20-something-year-old young man dressed up, sort of about to get married. And I thought, wow, I really wish that I could hear him, hear his voice and hear what he was thinking, what he was saying at that time. And I realized that what I really wished I had done was interviewed him when he was alive, that I had these interview skills that I hadn't even used on like my own family. And so I actually started doing interviews of my dad and my mom. And even when I had kids, I'd try to interview my kids once in a while. It's hard to get them to answer questions sometimes, but ask them, even little things like, what do you want to be when you grow up, or who's your best friend, or, just little questions like that to have a sort of snapshot of them at different ages. And I'd go back and look at these interviews, a year later, 2 years later, and I realized like how special these things were, And so I realized that like, this is something that everyone should do. And I wanted to try to create a set of tools to help people do that. And so right now we have an app that gives you some help with that. We also are increasingly really doing customized interview creation for people who want to create this content but don't know how. We have people who will actually help you, do an interview of your parents or your grandparents or your kids, and ask the questions for you, create the video content for you in a format very similar to this. And then for us, the real challenge is productizing that in a way that is scalable, right? And that allows people to do it themselves. So we do it for families, where we also have some businesses that want to have their CEO or their financial advisors, and they want to be interviewed by someone credible to talk about, what they offer to clients or customers in a format that really helps them connect with people. So we offer that too. And, listen, Wayne, startups are hard. And so it's a journey. The focus, has certainly evolved over time, and it will probably continue to evolve as long as we're at it. But it certainly has been a challenge and something that I've enjoyed doing because I have a lot of respect for people who have taken a swing at this.
Well, I certainly wish you a lot of luck with Persona, and I love what you're doing. I mean, it's actually something that I wish that I did with my own dad. Had that opportunity to interview him, and I wish I could talk to him now. It's one of those things. I completely hear you, and in that. In that sense, it's something it's amazing. And I think that one of the things that, also is so fascinating right now, and many people who are probably watching or listening to the show know the fact that, I really believe that, we are seeing an incredible change and transformation of the overall sports industry right now, and how sports betting and esports and just new technologies and data and analytics that are being used in the sports business is really changing the overall industry. And this is a time where I could see you and Persona and others really getting in and talking to in many cases, interviewing yourself, Rob, and right, how this, Connecticut got into this industry, what's next within this industry, and so many people who work so hard to get it to where it is today, but we're still so early. Rob, it's been great having you as a guest on our show, on our 76 Capital Leadership Series. Now make sure you will go out there and you follow Rob at Rob Simmelkjaer on Twitter. It's someone that you should be following. Again, it was amazing having the chairman of the board of the Connecticut Lottery on our show. And of course, remember, if you're an athlete, you're an entrepreneur, you're a business person who wants to work in the sports industry or build a company, whether that's around sports betting, esports, the media industry, please reach out to us. We'd love to talk with you and see if there are ways that we can help each other. So once again, I'm Wayne Kimmel. Thanks for tuning in for this edition of the 76 Capital Leadership Series. Rob, thanks so much for joining us.
Wayne, this was a lot of fun. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Now, of course, you just got to go out there and just make it happen. That's what it's all about. Have a great day, everybody.